This is Brain Injury Awareness Month, which is very exciting. And so I'm happy to be here to share a little bit about brain injury, talk a little bit about the overlapping symptoms that we might see with brain injury and post-traumatic stress, and then present a couple of ideas that might be useful for you in different environments, depending on where you're coming from and what kind of services you may be providing. So let me go ahead and share my screen. As I said, my name's Michelle Wild, and I run a nonprofit, Brain Education Strategies and Technology. I also am an educator. My career has been essentially working at a community college here in Southern California that has a special program for adults with traumatic brain injury or acquired brain injury. And so this has been something that I've done for a very long time. And my approach to this is going to be more from an educational perspective versus a medical perspective. So I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on that. So we had a few objectives that we set for today. One is to identify some common symptoms of TBI versus post-traumatic stress. And I have a little chart I'm going to show you for that. Describe the three phases of self-regulation. We're going to talk about self-regulation, what self-regulation is, and why I think it's a really good model to use in a variety of different situations. Then you're going to identify at least two questions from each self-regulation phase, and you'll understand that as we go through the webinar today. And then ultimately, I would love for you to be able to apply the model of self-regulation to a personal example, whether that's an example for you yourself or whether that's an example related to a client or something like that that you might be working with, a patient, depending on what your background is. So as we get started, I want to talk about TBI and post-traumatic stress. So my background, I have over 37 years working specifically with TBI. So individuals that have traumatic brain injury and atraumatic injuries. So I work with individuals that have had strokes, that have had brain tumors, car accidents, sports-related injuries, veterans that may have been exposed to blast injuries, just a wide variety of different types of individuals living with brain injury. And then we have post-traumatic stress. And it's interesting because for a lot of people, the overlapping or the similarities oftentimes are not recognized. So you'll see in this what we call a compare and contrast diagram. You'll see that I've got TBI on the left-hand side. And some of the differences with TBI, there's slow processing is involved in TBI. Oftentimes there's poor judgment and really rigid or inflexible kinds of decisions and that sort of thing. The differences for post-traumatic stress, hypervigilance, flashbacks, maybe withdrawal, and also avoidance. The similarities, though, are amazing in terms of the cognitive similarities and some of the other issues that they experience. So both people with TBI and or post-traumatic stress can and often do deal with issues like memory challenges, short-term memory, long-term memory challenges, paying attention, identifying the details, being very distractible. Organizational challenge are also some common issue that both types of individuals deal with. Fatigue, also anxiety, depression, pain, and sleep problems. So one thing that I wanted to share with you is I've done some little research projects, not real significant, but some little research projects over the years. One research project, we had 50 veterans, was teaching them how to use smart devices, their smartphone, their iPads or their iPhones and Androids and all of that. And it was really interesting. The project that I started with was really for TBI. And I had a professional reach out and say, you know, I have someone who has post-traumatic stress, and I'm wondering if they could join you in this project that you're working on. And so I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So we did it, and we just kept getting more individuals with post-traumatic stress who were really experiencing a lot of these similar symptoms that people with TBI have, and were really struggling. And a lot of times with post-traumatic stress, the cognitive issues that are often common aren't the ones that really get focused on. They may be recognized, but they may not be focused on. And so, in this one study that I did, it was very interesting because there were about equal numbers of just TBI and just post traumatic stress. And the individuals with post traumatic stress did really, really well in using the devices, learning to use the devices, and then using them to help them with self-regulation, organization, and a lot of these other kinds of overlapping symptoms. So I just wanted to mention that some of the cognitive issues are often overlooked because some of the emotional challenges that people have, of course, are extremely important and significant. So I hope that this chart kind of helps. This is just some basic things. Obviously, there's a lot more um, attributes of each of these different types, but this at least gives us a point of reference. Let me ask you, maybe you can just put something in the chat if you don't mind. How many of you are working specifically with brain injury versus post-traumatic stress? Do you mind putting just a couple? You can just put TBI and PTS or one or the other, just to give me a general idea of where we're coming from here. Okay, both, good. And so for those of you that are working with both, does this sort of chart resonate with you? Can you see the overlap that we're showing here as well as the differences? Thumbs up or thumbs down, yes or no? Yeah, just to give me a general idea. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. So I mentioned that I'm coming from an educational perspective, very different from a medical model. And so one of the things that I wanted to start with today is what I call, or what is called, the stages of learning. And there's 4 stages of learning that individuals go through. The first stage is what they call ignorance. It's an unfortunate name, but essentially all ignorance is you don't know what you don't know. And so we all experience ignorance based on this definition about some things. I don't know what I don't know about baseball or football, things that I don't really pay attention to. Um, the reason why this I think is important as we talk about brain injury and post-traumatic stress is a lot of times the individuals living with these conditions don't know what they don't know about it. They may not know that they're struggling emotionally. They may not know that they are forgetting things. And so they're sort of stuck in this state of ignorance. Sometimes their family members can be stuck in that place as well. They don't see, they don't understand what's going on. So the ignorance phase, we have the old saying, ignorance is bliss. So if you don't know what you're missing, you know, you don't really pay that much attention to it. At some point, a person with a brain injury or post-traumatic stress, some of these symptoms are being pointed out to them. And that's where the awareness phase occurs in education. And so I don't know what I don't know. And then all of a sudden I realize, oh man, I'm starting to realize my memory is not as good as it used to be. Or I'm recognizing more anxiety in myself. I didn't even think I was anxious, but I'm starting to get this sense of anxiety. Or, I've always been a good decision maker. I didn't realize that after my brain injury, I've been making some poor decisions. Do you see how that takes us from ignorance to sort of this awareness phase? Awareness is a very scary phase for people because it's when they are beginning to recognize that something isn't quite what they think it is. And I don't know how many of you here, I don't know where you all come from in terms of what services you might provide, et cetera. But as a provider, I want you to really think about this phase. That awareness phase for individuals who are just sort of becoming aware of the fact that, oh, wow, my brain injury is having an impact on me. Or, wow, these symptoms that I'm experiencing, other people have been pointing out, I'm starting to see them myself. That can be a very upsetting, very frustrating time for people. It can elicit a lot of, again, frustration or anger. And so awareness is something that takes time. It may take them 5 times for you to tell them something before it gets from their ignorant stage to their awareness stage. Or it may take 10 times, or it could take more than that. It People, from my experience over the years, people sort of become aware when they're ready to. And I think that that's an important thing as well. We have to sort of guide them gently to help them develop that level of awareness. If we are too harsh or we point it out and we push too hard, etc., we're just going to shut them down. And they're then going to step away from us when we may be the ones that can actually help them. So I think this awareness phase is extremely important and something that that providers need to consider and think about how they may help that individual become more aware of what challenges they might be experiencing. And I can tell you, at least from my perspective and in working with the students that I work with at Coastline and in the nonprofit, a lot of times it's a slow process. It's, just sort of pointing out a few things here or there, having them get to that point where they're becoming aware. And then once they hit the awareness phase, at that point in time, they're able to then begin to learn strategies that can help them deal with those things. But until they're aware of it, until they sort of acknowledge it, I don't use the word acceptance because I'm not sure anyone really ever accepts the brain injury, but they acknowledge it, they recognize it, they know that they're living with it. And so as a result of that, that's sort of getting to that awareness stage. Once they get there, then they're open to learning. And that's where strategies come into play. That's when we present them, hopefully, with some strategies. So for instance, let's just say that a client, you're with a client and that client doesn't realize that they're missing appointments all the time with you, right? Just all of a sudden, oh, they came. I wasn't expecting it because they've missed so many other appointments or something to that effect. They don't even know they're missing appointments. Why don't they know? Because they don't have that awareness. Their memory may be impacted as a result of the brain injury. They don't think they need to write things down, right? And so they don't write things down, or they'll say, "Oh yeah, I'll remember that," but they don't. At some point in time, they get to that awareness level, and maybe we help them. So, maybe Brianna, I tell you, Brianna, I don't know if you're aware of this, but we've tried to meet 3 times, and for whatever reason, we haven't been able to meet. You missed the appointment. Don't just jump all over them, because if we do that, and I'm not saying anyone here would, but if we do that, that's going to shut them down, or it's going to upset them, and then they're going to lash out. And that's the last thing that you want. And it's also really the last thing they want, I think. So this idea of awareness and sort of helping them develop the awareness is a really important part of this whole learning process. Once they have the awareness and you're starting to give them strategies. So in my example, Brianna, I know you, so you're going to get picked on a lot today. Sorry. And you're right in front of me on my screen. So once Brianna is aware and we've sort of had the conversation, Brianna, you kind of miss your appointments pretty frequently. Then we can start learning. We can start talking about, what, why don't we put this in your calendar? Why don't we set a reminder? Why don't we, there's strategies that they can learn that will help them in this case, be more responsible, be more independent, etc. And so that's the learning phase. And I'll tell you, whether it's a person that has brain injury or post-traumatic stress, strategies that used to work for them often no longer work for them. It's sort of like starting fresh. And that, again, is a frustrating and upsetting and overwhelming kind of feeling. And so if you were to say with them, let's say that you met with them before and you knew them before, and, I'm like, well, Brianna, just put it in your phone like you always did. That's not going to be helpful to Brianna because, it may work now, but that may also not work. Maybe Brianna had a paper calendar before, and so everything she did was on a paper calendar. Okay. Now she has a paper calendar, but she doesn't have a very good memory. And so she forgets to look at the paper calendar. Okay. So now an electronic calendar may actually be better because you can set multiple alarms to go along with the calendar appointment. And maybe Brianna doesn't know how to use her phone well enough to put in the alarms and all of that. And so that's part of the learning process too. I might show her how to do it the first time, but do it for her. And then the next time I might do the same thing. And the third time I would say, Brianna, let's do this together, right? I put this in the calendar a few times. Can you help me do this? What should I do? And really engage that person. If they are participating in what you're doing, they feel a part of it. And they have skin in the game, so to speak, because they're now actually participating. A lot of times what I have seen professionals do is forget that the client really wants to be involved. And so we just sort of do it for them because it's easier or it's faster or it's more convenient. And all of those things are perfectly valid things. The issue, however, is that if we're doing it for them, they often are not learning to do it. And so if Brianna is missing appointments, if I just keep doing it for her, as soon as I stop doing it for her, guess what? She'll start missing her appointments again. We have to get to that point where we're helping individuals learn strategies that are going to benefit them, teach them the strategies so that they will be able to use those strategies on an ongoing basis on their own. Instead of sort of preparing them to be reliant on us, we have to help them learn to be independent of us. And that's a process, and it's a series of stages that we have to go through with them. In my experience, again, working with brain injury and post-traumatic stress, there's not a quick fix, right? It is not a once and done kind of thing. This is something that we will have to do many, many times over and over again in order to help them learn the information, practice the information, and ultimately, hopefully, get to that fourth stage of learning, which is mastery. So the learning process takes a lot of time. It's a lot of practice. It can be frustrating. There's lots of ups and downs, right? People make mistakes. I always tell my students, mistakes aren't always bad because we learn from them. If we stop and if we learn from the mistakes that we make, then we have the potential of not making them again. And so that is a really important thing. Once you get to mastery is when things are sort of just automatic. You just sort of do them, right? You're driving a car, and when you're learning to drive a car, you're supposed to be checking the mirrors, and you make sure you put your foot on the brake, and all the different things that we learn. And once you're a master of driving, do you do those things anymore? They just sort of become automatic. So maybe you do them, but they're not intentionally, you're not intentionally thinking about them. And so that's what mastery is. So in the example of Brianna and I working on putting a calendar appointment in, some strategy for calendaring appointments, once Brianna is able to do that on her own and do that reliably, she's now mastered that. And that's ultimately what we want. And once you master something, then you can generalize it and use that same thing, that same knowledge base that you have in other areas of your life. So that's a real important thing as well. But I'll also say about mastery, mastery requires constant practice as well. Think about learning to play the piano or shooting hoops or whatever the case might be. If you are shooting hoops, you're learning how to do it. You're standing at the free throw line. You're, practicing. You're getting the sense of how the ball feels as it goes off your fingertips. You're doing all that. Well, you've become a master at it, right? You still have to shoot hoops all the time. You can't just sit back and go, okay, well, I've shot 100 shots great, and so I'm good. You've got to just keep shooting shots. So mastery is something where things become a little bit more automatic for you. Maybe you don't need as much practice, but you can't just stop. And so in the example with Brianna, if she masters the use of putting things in the calendar and she does that and she's doing it reliably, and then I stop working with her and she stops using the calendar, guess what? She's going to backslide. She's going to start forgetting appointments again. And so this is sort of this 4 stages of learning and how they relate to, you potentially working with clients. If you understand this, and if you can think about these stages as you're working with your clients, it really can make a difference in not only how you approach them, but in how they approach you and how they understand you and what you're doing to help them. Are there any questions about the 4 stages of learning before I go on? I'm going to move on to something called self-regulation. Any questions about 4 stages? In the chat, can you see how this might be useful to you or not? These 4 stages? Okay, you've got a couple of yeses. Good. Be honest. If you don't see it, that's fine. I would rather know honestly that it's making sense or not, because I want to make sure that whatever we do today is something you can take with you and hopefully use it later on.
And Michelle,
Okay.
to add
Yeah.
to that, I think it's really great that not only did you say give us the tools for the 4 stages, but also just how to approach that. So when the awareness stage, it's not an attack against someone, but just bringing that awareness gently so that, things are changing, they're getting frustrated, and help kind of guide along the way of how to approach the 4 stages. So I appreciate you adding that part in as well.
Yeah. There's one other thing that I'll mention about that since you commented, Brianna. One of the things that's really important, especially with brain injury, and I'm going to go with post-traumatic stress as well, is something called self-efficacy. And I don't know if you guys are real familiar with that term, but self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to do a particular task. Okay. One of the things that happens after brain injury is people lose their self-efficacy. They don't just lose their self-confidence, they lose their belief in their self that they can even do the simplest of tasks. And so in that example with the calendar, Brianna, part of what we're doing in that awareness stage and in that learning stage is we're helping them develop their belief in their self again. It's really hard to move forward when you don't believe in yourself, when you don't believe that you can do something. And so that was one of the reasons why I mentioned, I'm going to help you. I'm going to do it for you. I want you to watch me do this, Brianna, a couple times. And then the 3rd time I do it, I'm actually going to engage you in the process as well. Remember, we've been doing this. Let's try it together. Let's see how far we can get. Building their self-efficacy is very important. And as professionals and as providers, identifying and recognizing even little successes that they makes all the difference in the world. And so, they might not get it in there right. That's okay. I might tell Jim, you did a great job. You got the doctor's name in there in the right field. That's awesome. It's really important for them to begin to feel like they are succeeding. And so often in life, we only see success as the end run, the end game, right? The outcome that we planned on. That's when we can celebrate our success. The reality is there's 1,000 successes from when we first start to when we get to that final outcome. And if you as providers and professionals can help your clients or patients or whatever see some of their successes along the way, it'll go a long way in building rapport with you and in helping them build that self-efficacy that I was talking about. Okay. So the next topic is self-regulation, and we're going to spend really the rest of the webinar today on this particular strategy. I look at this as a strategy. Depending on what your background is and where you're coming from, self-regulation is sort of this idea of you plan, you monitor, and you evaluate. Okay? And I'm going to go through each one of these with you. You are probably, if you're familiar with self-regulation, you're probably familiar with it from the component of emotional self-regulation, learning to self-regulate your emotions and your behavior in the sense of, not getting angry or frustrated or throwing things or stuff like that. I look at it from a different perspective. I'm looking at self-regulation sort of as a learning process. And so self-regulation is really your ability to control your behavior through establishing a plan, recognizing and monitoring progress, and then evaluating the outcome. It's really no different. I mean, it's not a new concept. It may just be a slightly different way of looking at a concept that you're already familiar with. So here we have, why is self-regulation important? Well, one of the things that we do know about brain injury and post-traumatic stress is that structure really helps individuals who are dealing with those two things. And so what self-regulation does, if you follow sort of this model that I'm going to present to you, is it really provides a structure that they can use to improve their outcomes. And it is a very specific structure that they follow. It leads to better decisions. It actually helps people develop awareness. And I'll explain why as we talk about these different phases. And then ultimately, it can also help improve a person's ability to react to conflicts in a more appropriate way. Oops, sorry. So we're going to start with the plan phase, okay, or planning. The planning phase sets the stage for learning. It sets the stage for what you're about to do. And it includes 4 questions that you should ask. So you, as a provider, you could ask these questions of your client. But you can also teach your client to ask these questions of themselves. That's part of what this is all about. The first question is, what's my purpose? We often don't stop and think about why we're doing certain. We just kind of go from one thing to the next, etc. Stopping and asking what my purpose is a really important thing for people with TBI and post-traumatic stress to do. It helps focus them. It helps them identify why they're doing something. I always recommend when people are just getting started with this concept to write their purpose down. Because if they don't write their purpose down, interestingly enough, it will change. They will forget what their purpose was, and then they'll modify it a little bit. And when your purpose is sort of constantly changing, it's very hard to get what you want or need out of a situation. The second question that you ask is, what do I know from my previous experience? What do I already know about this situation? Like, again, I'm going to work with Brianna on the phone thing. What's our purpose? My purpose is to help Brianna learn how to use her smartphone to enter appointments and to follow through and show up to appointments. That's my purpose. Okay. What do I already know from previous experiences? Well, I know Brianna is not really great at using a smartphone. She didn't really like her smartphone. She thinks her smartphone is for Facebook and Twitter and all the social media stuff and to make phone calls and to play games. She didn't even realize her smartphone had a purpose of something other than that. So I know that about Brianna. Well, if I know that, then I can approach her a little bit differently when I try to get her to do this. I know that Brianna has tried using paper calendars in the past. But I also know that she is late for appointments and doesn't show up. So I know those paper calendars aren't working for her. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm sort of just thinking about what do I already know about this person? It could also be, well, I know Brianna can get a little snarky sometimes when she's, tired or when we have a late afternoon appointment because her fatigue is kicking in when she has her brain injury or whatever the case might be. You go in knowing this stuff. It doesn't catch you by surprise. And so if I know Brianna can be a bit snarky, which I don't think she would ever be snarky, but if I thought Brianna could be snarky because we're meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then it allows me to think, maybe I should try and get a different appointment with her because if she's snarky, she's not really going to learn very much, right? She's just going to kind of be in a bad mood and tired and crabby and all of that. Or I might say, if she's kind of frustrated, I'm going to do something like ask her about her dog before we get started. Like I'm going to do something that I can do that will help sort of de-escalate some of that anxiety or whatever it is that she experiences. Question 3 is what is my plan? How am I going to approach Brianna today? Not the big scheme, not like how's my plan for the next 3 weeks trying to teach her this stuff. It's what's my plan for right now? This one instance of working with Brianna, what is my plan? And then finally, in the planning phase, I ask what strategies should I use? What strategy should I show her how to do it a couple times and then ask her to participate? Do I tell her to pull her phone out and follow along with me? What strategy am I going to use? Am I going to tell her to take notes as I do it so that she can go in and maybe do it herself? These are all things that are part of this planning phase of self-regulation. Okay. Are questions always, is asking the right question always important? Yeah, it is. You've got to ask these questions. These questions are going to drive you, help you focus on what's important in that meeting with that person. Okay. So let's take a look at what's my purpose for just a moment. This initial question that you asked during the planning phase really sets the stage for learning. Okay. It prepares them for what you're going to be doing. So I might tell Brianna what my purpose is. Brianna, we've been working on this a little bit. Today, our purpose is going to be this. I set it up right there in front. She knows now. All I expect her to do today is to be able to put in the name of the appointment and, whatever, and an alarm, an alert, or a notification. I tell her up front. And as a practitioner or as a provider, you can let them set the purpose as well, right? You can sort of come up with a joint purpose sometimes. That may be appropriate. Identifying what your purpose is also helps establish motivation. This is critical. Motivation is something that, when you feel defeated, when you feel like things aren't going your way, you're often not motivated to do anything about it. And so if you stop and you ask what your purpose is, it can really help you identify and begin to work with that motivation. It also helps you stay focused. One of the things that we know about brain injury and post-traumatic stress is that oftentimes they can be easily distracted. So if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you start with purpose A and you don't write it down, you could be at purpose F by the time that you get to the end of the meeting. Like you didn't get your needs met if you're a person living with brain injury or post-traumatic stress, and then you're frustrated, and then you don't want to go back because I didn't get my needs met. Well, one of the reasons is because you may not have written down your purpose so that you can stay on track and stay focused. The other thing is that it helps you redirect when you do get distracted. I can't tell you how many times I've heard my students come in and say, I went to the doctor and I really wanted to talk to him about this. And I don't even know how we got off track, but I didn't get that question answered. And now I've got to call him back, or whatever. Self-regulation is the strategy for that. You go in, you know what your purpose is. And before you leave the practice session with the practitioner or the provider, or before you leave the doctor's office, you look on your sheet of paper and you say, did I get my purpose met? And if the answer is yes, then you're good to go. If not, then you may, want to redirect. And I may want to, tell Brianna, I love the story of your vacation, Brianna. It was, I would love to do something like that, but I want to redirect us and I want to come back to your phone because guess what? If we can teach you how to use your phone and set reminders, when you go on vacation, you're going to remember or get reminded that you have a hike scheduled tomorrow morning. Instead of sleeping in and missing it, you're going to be able to do this hike because you're now going to have this new skill. Okay. So, think about, when do you ask what's my purpose? You can ask it all over the place. That's what I love about this concept of self-regulation in the way that we sort of approach it. You can ask what's your purpose for reading a book or a contract, for reviewing your bank statement. Do I want to know every expense that I had this month, or do I just want to know what my balance is? Two very different purposes. And your approach to looking at that bank statement is going to change based on what your purpose is. At least it should. Going to the doctor's appointment, going to the market, visiting with friends, making a phone call. Making a phone call is a big one, because if you don't write down what your purpose is for that phone call, you make the phone call, you're calling the doctor to get your prescription renewed. You just want him to call the pharmacy or whatever, right, to get your prescription renewed. You call and all of a sudden, thank you very much for calling. We're sorry, but we've got a long list of people here. And, now they put Muzak on, and 10 minutes later, you have no idea why you called, right? You're so frustrated and upset and distracted because something else has happened. So this purpose thing is really, really important. Any thoughts or questions about that? No? Okay. Second question is, what do I already know, right? What does my previous experience help me with here? This is when I was saying, okay, I know Brianna can be snarky at 4 o'clock. So I either want to change the appointment or I want to come at the meeting with her in a slightly different way because of this thing that I know. Sorry, Brianna, I told you were going to regret being. All right. So why do we ask, what do I already know? Because it starts the process of generating questions. It helps us develop a foundational level of awareness that we can then build on. Okay. It helps us recognize, you know what? I don't really know some of the answers to some of these questions. And so maybe I need to approach it differently from that perspective. Uh, it it can also act as a really good review. It's for resourceful thinking, but it also acts as a really great review. You stop for, and it doesn't have to take very long, 2 minutes before Brianna walks in my office, I do this quick thing. What's my purpose for meeting with Brianna today? What do I already know? Done. Now Brianna walks in and I am more prepared. I'm more centered. I'm more focused, and I'm able to give her what she needs because I've gone through this very short little process. Okay. Think about prior situations that you might have been in. Like I said, I've met with Brianna 5 times and 3 of them have been at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's not a good outcome. And it might not even be she's snarky. If a person has a brain injury and you're meeting with them at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock or even 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's quite likely that they're not going to be at their optimal level of performance because of fatigue and all sorts of other things. what you'd like to learn about a situation, and also what you don't already know about a situation. Maybe there's some questions that I don't know the answers to that I want to make sure I get the answers to. So I don't know if you guys have any questions. If you do, please feel free to shout out or to put them in the chat. And Brianna, maybe if you're not too mad at me yet, you can keep an eye on that and let me know if there's a question coming up.
Yeah, I'll definitely let you know.
Okay,
We do have a comment that asking what is the purpose lets us check in and know we are on the same page.
that's exactly right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, if you go into a session, regardless of what you do, if you're a provider and you're going into a session and the veteran is coming in with one intent and you're coming in with a different intent, that's going to be conflict right off the bat. And so sharing your purpose, you know what, Brianna, here's what my thoughts are for today. And then Brianna goes, oh, no, no, that's not what I thought I was here for. You get that clarified right up front, and now all of a sudden you can have a productive meeting. So the next question, the third question in the planning phase of self-regulation is, what's my plan? Like, what am I going to do? This helps you focus. It really helps you provide a structure for what you're going to do in that session or in that meeting or whatever it might be. It helps identify steps that can help you accomplish the tasks. And it can also help reduce their impulsivity as well as maybe our own impulsivity. So you want to have a plan. And that might be, today we are here's our purpose. I've thought about what I already know. Now, I've thought about a plan today for how we should approach teaching you to put an appointment in your phone, Brianna. And I want to make sure that you understand why it's so important for you to learn how to do this yourself. That's part of my plan, right? I want to make sure that she knows why this matters. And then I'm going to teach you just simply how to add two things to a calendar appointment. There's more stuff that you can learn to add, but today we're just going to do two things. And so we go through that, and I would show her that, and that is the plan for the day. And maybe part of the plan is also doing a review at the end, or part of the plan is doing what I call an iterative review, which is at the beginning. Like I might ask Brianna, I'll say, Brianna, I want to do a quick iterative review with you. Last time we talked about how to put calendar or why putting appointments in your calendar is important. What do you think about that? Do you remember what we said about that? What did you take away from that? That pulls her information from long-term memory. It allows her to sort of think about it, and it also allows me to know what she got out of it and whether or not I need to backtrack a little bit because she didn't quite get all of it, or whether she's good to go and we can move forward without review. The fourth question in the planning phase is, what strategies should I use? We've now got our purpose. We know what we know our past experiences. We have a plan. Now the question is, what strategies am I going to use? And so strategies might be, I'm going to have Brianna write down the steps and I'm going to go over them with her. I'm going to have Brianna, enter in 2 appointments with me right now before she leaves today so that she can practice later. Those kinds of things are strategies. Okay. It helps to remember to use strategies when you go over them. It helps to identify possible strategies. Strategies are a brain injury survivor's best friend, because strategies are what's going to help them get through their everyday life. And we often don't think of ourselves using strategies, but we do all the time. If I look at my phone before I get on the freeway to go home to check the traffic, that's a strategy. We just don't think of it in that way. And so for a person with a brain injury and people with post-traumatic stress, sometimes they need help with those strategies. And like I said, sometimes the strategies they used to always use to deal with things no longer work in the same way. And so we may need to help them come up with new strategies.
So we do have a question here,
Yeah,
and
great.
it's, can TBIs be medically induced, let's say through surgery, etc.?
Can TBIs be medically induced? I don't know, technically, I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I'm hypothesizing based on my understanding. TBIs are typically not medical issues. So, for instance, a TBI is from a traumatic event, typically car accident, sports related injury, those kinds of things. If someone has a stroke while they're on a operating table or something like that, then typically I don't think that's necessarily categorized as a TBI. It would be what we call an acquired brain injury, acknowledging that it's a brain injury, but it's not caused by a traumatic event, so to speak. So again, I'm not a doctor, but that would be my best guess on that response. Okay, so during the monitoring phase, which is the second phase, okay, here are some of the questions that you want to ask yourself. How am I doing? So the way that this works is you got your plan, you know what you're going to do, you've got your strategies, and you start doing it. Okay. Then what you do, and the way I do this is I do it sort of in an artificial way. So I say if someone's going to read for an hour, I tell them halfway through that reading session they should stop and monitor. It's like a conscious act that they do. And so 30 minutes into this reading session that they have, they're going to stop and ask themselves some questions. How am I doing? Is my plan working? Are my strategies working? Am I too tired to keep going? Should I modify my plan? Should I take a break? Okay. These are all questions that you can ask during this monitoring phase. One of the things that tends to happen, especially after brain injury, is once they start something, they don't want to stop it till they're done because that's how they always were before their injury. After the injury, that is not a good strategy. So monitoring is better. And monitoring is important for you guys as providers to understand as well. Because Brianna, if you're working with someone and you are not monitoring, you're just ripping right on through whatever it is you want to get done because you only got an hour and you got to get it done and all that. And the veteran you're working with started fading 40 minutes ago, right? You're not monitoring how the session is going. And what happens is you got through everything you wanted to do in that hour, but your veteran didn't hear anything after the first 15 minutes. So did you really have a successful session or not? All right. And monitoring, you'll notice here that the arrows go both directions. If you're monitoring Brianna and working with a veteran and you realize, oh, this is not going so well, like he or she's fading, or, they're getting frustrated or they're getting angry or something like that, then you probably want to adjust what's going on and not just keep going doing the status quo. Okay. You'll also notice here is this word reflection. Reflection is, in my mind, sort of like metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about what you're doing while you're doing it to sort of improve it, okay, or to be more present in it. So reflection is sort of like this 10,000-foot view that you do. It's not easy to do. It takes a really long time to get to master it, okay? But I sort of see it like meditation. Like when I first start meditating, it's like, oh man, really? It's only been 2 minutes? Are you kidding me? It's only been 2 minutes. And then, as you get better at it and as you practice it, it's like, 2 minutes is nothing. Now you're at 10, 15 minutes and you're starting to feel the impact of the meditation. So reflection is sort of like that. It's something that you're going to develop over time, but don't expect it to happen immediately. It is a slow process that you can improve on over time. And then the last phase of self-regulation is what we call the evaluation phase or the evaluate phase. And this is when you've finished, done whatever it is. Now you evaluate. And I will guarantee you that a lot of people with brain injury and post-traumatic stress do not evaluate. They may not plan. Oftentimes they don't monitor, but they really don't evaluate either. So this process of self-regulation is so important for these populations that we're talking about. Okay, so in this evaluation phase, I'm done. I've met with Brianna, and I'm going to take just a few minutes to stop and ask myself, how did it go? Did Brianna really understand the strategies? Did she really write down the stuff that I told her to write down or not? And how did the strategy work? You know, well, she was writing with a pen and she misspelled some things and she kept scratching them off because she couldn't erase them. And that was really frustrating for her. Okay, I'm going to learn from this experience. And the next time I go in and I work with Brianna, Self Regulation 2.0, guess what? That new information that I have from my evaluation is part of what do I already know about this experience. And so now when Brianna comes in with her pen and her sheet of paper and she starts writing down instructions, I might help her develop some awareness, going back to our stages of learning. Brianna, I noticed last time that you seemed to be a little bit distracted because you were having some problems using ink and you couldn't erase it. I have a pencil for you this time. Would you like to try that? That helps her learn. It helps her develop awareness. And you're using this planning 2.0, and now you're implementing this new thing in order to help her. So this is kind of how it looks like. This, if you were taking a webinar, right? Today's webinar, you plan, how am I going to approach today's webinar or today's session or whatever you might have? You ask those 4 questions. What's my purpose? What do I already know? What's my plan? And what strategies am I going to use? And then you engage in whatever it is, the webinar, the session with the veteran, whatever it might be. And then halfway through, you monitor. How's this going? Is it working? Do I need to adjust anything right now? If things aren't going well, don't just keep pushing through them. That is what a person with a brain injury and post-traumatic stress will do. They won't recognize necessarily that things aren't going well. And even if they do, they're not going to change. They don't pivot. Monitoring is all about pivoting when you realize something isn't going in the way that you want it to go. Afterwards, you evaluate. You know what? I recognize that I should have stopped and I didn't. Guess what? Next time you do a webinar, now you have a new plan. Your purpose may be the same. Your purpose may change, but the process, the system that I'm trying to share with you is going to be consistent all the time. I can use this if I'm going shopping at Costco. I can do this if I'm coming into a session with Brianna. I can do this if I'm trying to, do something with my kids. I can use this process of self-regulation in almost any aspect of my life. And that's why I thought this was an important topic. And I was so glad Heather and Brianna and Tom were open to it because I think this is such an important topic. It's not just about the veteran in this case, but it is, but it isn't. It's also about you and about what you can learn and about what you can do in order to help that veteran by doing your own self-regulation practice. So here's a quick little cheat sheet of sorts. And I saw something in the chat about the slides. I'm happy to provide Brianna you with the slides or Tom or whoever, and you're welcome to send them out to people that might benefit from them. So this is just, again, a quick cheat sheet. Here's the 4 questions you're going to ask during the planning phase. Here's some of the questions you're going to ask when you're monitoring, and here's some of the questions you're going to ask as you evaluate. So I'm Michelle Renee Wild, and again, I work at Coastline College, which is here in Southern California, but I also run a nonprofit called BEST, Brain Education Strategies and Technology, and we offer free webinars for brain injury survivors. Could be individuals that are suffering from the same kinds of cognitive issues that a person with a brain injury deals with. They're welcome to join us. Our webinars are all free, and we do them twice a month on the 2nd and the 4th weekend or Saturdays of the month. And we have one more webinar of the series that we're currently in, and then in April, we're going to start a 5-week memory series. And that again will be free of charge, and they're from 10 to 11 Pacific time.